Welcome to the .NET Talk Show with your hosts, Cam Soper, David Pye, and not the Scott we deserve, but the Scott we needed, Scott Addy. The .NET Talk Show starts now.
Whew. Success.
Cheer.
I was recording that the entire time over here to watch like the transitions to make sure like this is actually the first time that our website has held up and it's successfully embedded the app. It had the countdown, it had the flash, everything's success, and that's a great start to our show. So I'd like to welcome our guest this week, one of my personal friends, good buddy of mine, Salton Burnham, also known as Chris DeMars.
Woo-woo.
Chris in the house. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. All y'all, how y'all doing?
It's Thursday.
It's Thursday, man. The weeks go by so quick.
It's Thursday and I'm jobless.
I thought it was Friday.
Just today, though.
Just today.
So you're starting a new job soon?
Tomorrow morning.
Oh, right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What will you be doing?
I am going to be working as a developer advocate at Quicken Loans.
Quicken Loans, developer avocado.
That's right. I'll be an avocado now.
So
Avocado.
avocado of what? Is there some platform there you're promoting, or?
I don't know yet, to be honest. I know that the team is comprised of amazing people in like different areas of the web. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
That's awesome. I'm very happy for you. And I think to set the stage here for a little bit, I know last week there was a Twitch stream where David Neal was doing some artwork, right? Kind of showing his pen sketches. And he was encompassing this holistic view of the developer community. And I thought that was super impactful. And one of the things that I have been, super excited about is the developer community. And I think it's only fitting that we get to share our origin story, Chris, live on our show.
Oh, snap.
So I feel free to interject, right? I don't want to steal any thunder.
Right.
But so what was it? Probably 2017, so 3 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
We were at Detroit Code, and I know Scott Addy was there too, right? Scott, you were there.
I was there. Yep. The riverfront in Detroit, the
Yep.
GM Renaissance Center.
Yeah, it was a beautiful venue, awesome developer conference in Detroit. First time for me being in Detroit at a conference. And I remember during the speaker dinner, Chris was sitting by himself, right? So he was isolated, just sitting there by himself. Everyone else was interacting. And I felt as though, Chris and I, we have tattoos, right? We had similar shoes. Ironically, we both had, flat built hats. And it was kind of like this thing where I felt as though, and despite how he looked, I would have still approached him. But what I did was I approached him and I said, hey, man, you can't sit there by yourself. You got to come socialize a little bit, meet some people. And I was meeting new people too. So ever since then, me kind of welcoming, I can't even
Spit
talk.
it out, Dave.
Just like,
dude.
we got together, right? Like, and we made it
Yeah.
happen. And ever since we've been real good friends. And I think that is part of developer community. Something that we need to embrace more often is including everyone and trying to be, like-minded.
Yeah, well, it's funny too because I'm local to Detroit. I just moved back from Denver, but at that time, I was living in the city, and I didn't know for a local event. I didn't know anybody. Like nobody local seemed to be there speaking. So that's why I was by myself. Like I don't, I'm not gonna go just immerse myself in a group of people I don't know, especially like a lot of amazing speakers. So that's why I was alone at the table. Because I didn't really know anybody at a local event. So
I distinctly remember the matching checkered shoes. And at that point, I made a mental note that after that conference, I had to go out and order some checkered Vans as well.
hell yeah, that's what's up.
That's awesome.
I'm trying to find the picture. I have it on my phone.
Yeah, I've got it somewhere too. We'll have to share that in the notes, the origin story. But I know that we've got something very special, and I know our show focuses on .NET, and I know the last couple shows we've actually had an emphasis, ironically, on Blazor. And our app that we have our site on is Blazor, and it's pretty exciting to kind of showcase what Blazor can do. But at the end of the day, it's all just HTML, CSS, and there's obviously JavaScript. But with Blazor, you can get WebAssembly. But we don't need to get into that. We just need to get into the final product, which is the HTML. And Chris is here today to do kind of a formal audit and walkthrough and evaluation of accessibility in terms of our website. And I think it can be applied to not just Blazor, but websites holistically.
I'm excited.
There's something else to point out here. The four of us on this stream are extremely privileged. We don't, as far as I know, suffer from things like color blindness. We don't need assistive devices like screen readers. But unfortunately, in so many companies out there, accessibility needs take back seat to everything else. I'm hoping Chris in today's show can sort of sell us on making accessibility a requirement in any project that we're taking on.
Yeah, that's the game plan. One quote. Well, there's two quotes really that I always say. The three things that should take priority over everything when you're building on the web or starting a project that involves the web: security, performance, accessibility. Those are the three main things that need to take priority. Not that order, but those are all the things that they're always put on the back burner at the start of a project. And then at the end, you realize, oh, dang, like we have to retrofit this stuff in, and now it's going to take even longer. It might be a little bit harder. So always having that at the forefront. First things first is the thing you have to do. And I always say accessibility is not a requirement. It is a must. You got to care about these things, because the web isn't just for me and for you, Dave, and Scott and Cam. It's for everybody, and everybody's different. So.
Cool. So you say accessibility is a must. I can't say I disagree at all. Are there any tools that you would recommend someone use if they want to really take accessibility seriously on their next project?
Yeah, so there's a handful of tools and ones that I advocate for and I use. I've used it at work and I use for my personal stuff. One comes directly in Chrome's DevTools. It's built right in. It used to be a standalone application, and that's Lighthouse. In Lighthouse, you can run different audits on your experience, SEO, search engine optimization. You can run a PWA audit or progressive web apps. You can run a performance audit, accessibility audit, and like a best practices audit. So I usually use Lighthouse to get a score. You get a score out of 0 to 100 instead of page-by-page basis. So you want to be close to the green. Now there's different schools of thought and debates on whether or not Lighthouse matters and, who cares about a score. I personally think it's a good place to gauge where you're at. Closer you are to the green, the better. That's kind of like the goal you want to get to. And it gives you like a listing of different things you can improve, where the errors are. And it's also built on top of X, which is a product by DQ, not Dairy Queen. DQ is a company out here in, it's true. Every time I talk about DQ, everybody's like, oh, Dairy Queen.
You got my hopes up.
I know. Sorry.
That's awesome.
If you turn this upside down, that's Dairy Queen, right? Blizzards. Anyways.
So you mentioned Axe. How do you actually spell Axe? I'm immediately thinking of Axe body spray.
Yeah, so it's AXE. It's
okay.
AXE. Yep. So Axe is a tool by DQ. You can use it in the browser as a browser extension for Chrome and Firefox to run accessibility audits. You can also use it inside your testing suite. You can use it in Cypress, Jest, different end-to-end suites like that. And it'll give you an audit, essentially, of the accessibility errors. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is that tools like Axe and Lighthouse and even the Wave engine that WebAIM uses, they're only going to catch between, I would say, 20 to 50% of all your accessibility errors. The only way to get everything is to manually test. So using a screen reader like JAWS or NVDA for Windows, if you're on a Windows machine. Mac VoiceOver is already built into Mac OS and iOS applications or machines. So you use those with a screen reader and make sure you shut your monitor off, or like at least close it down a little bit so you can hear the output, not visually see what you're listening to. That doesn't help anybody.
I love that. And I've actually done that not using screen readers. So I'm going to ask for some clarification on that. So there's like the read aloud features that exist as like a plugin on some of the browsers. Like I know Edge has it. and I do reading aloud. Like when I'll write like content as a content developer, or if I'll write a blog post, and I'll actually do the read aloud so that I can hear something reading my text. And it's actually really easy to identify when there's like things that are, don't make sense, like a sentence or something. But so I'm using it. It's like a different use case, I guess. But out of curiosity, how do screen readers differentiate from like the read aloud capabilities?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the screen reader, let's see here. I've only ever used a screen reader in the browser.
Okay.
So I wouldn't know how exactly they differentiate, but I would assume that they wouldn't work the same as far as being able to identify ARIA and semantic markup, stuff like that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
And then also Lighthouse is, you mentioned that being with Chrome. Is that Chromium based? So we would get that with Edge as well?
Oh, you know what? Let's see, because I might have Edge.
There's one way to find out.
Let's see.
My one way was to ask Chris. I don't.
Oh, that's what I had in mind. I don't know what he was thinking.
Let's see. Let's deny that. Does that still open up?
Microsoft Edge, and there's this weird little Apple icon in the top left-hand corner. What is this machine you're using here?
Yeah, so this is like the best machine in the world. This is a MacBook Pro by Apple, one of the best companies in the world.
Oof.
If you don't have one, I suggest you switch to that because it can do 100 times more than a Windows machine. So,
Well, I've got both.
Ooh.
I've got both. I've got a MacBook Pro and a Surface. So
well, would you look at that? So yeah, I don't use Edge much, but you can generate reports in Lighthouse.
awesome. Cool.
And yeah, so that's sweet. And accessibility seems to be a problem. See, Microsoft. What can I tell you? Just kidding.
So, Chris, you mentioned one thing earlier, and I think a lot of people aren't even familiar with things like ARIA.
Yeah.
Why does ARIA matter? Why would you consider incorporating that into your web application?
Definitely, yeah. ARIA is one of those things where it's tricky, right? The one rule of ARIA is do not use ARIA. And for anybody that's wants to know, ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And the way it works, it helps the browser let the screen reader or assistive technology know what you're interacting with. But if you can use semantic markup for the whole experience as much as you can, always use semantic markup. Like use a header element, main element, nav, footer,
Article,
side, section, article. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Use that stuff first. And if you can't, if you've expended and you've exhausted all your options for semantic markup, then bake in the ARIA. Now, a couple different patterns that you'll see out there where you would want to use like an ARIA role or an ARIA attribute is with like an X at the corner of a modal. That is a non-contextual element. There is no X element in semantic markup. So your chances are you're going to use a div or a span. So let's say you open up that modal and you're focusing through it and you're tabbing through it and it gets to the X and you get focused on the X and you're a screen reader user. If you don't have an ARIA label on that, all it's going to announce to the user is X or like ampersand times semicolon or colon, whatever the case may be.
Right. Interesting.
Right. If you don't have an ARIA label equals close, now the user isn't going to know what to do. And they might be trapped in that modal because if it says X and they can't see what it is, they're going to continue to hit tab or whatever, key bindings they have for their screen reader. And they're just going to keep circling that whole entire modal because they'll never be able to shift that focus back to the main window. But if you have ARIA label of close or exit, that will announce to your user, once they focus to it, close button. And then they hit enter or space and it will close that modal, shift focus back. You see this also with social media icons. Social media icons, that's all they are. They're just icons, right? They're usually in a list with, wrapped in a span or an I element, not italics, I for icon. And it's an empty link because it's a link that just has an image, right? There is no, you don't put Twitter in between those anchor tags.
Right.
But if you put an ARIA label equals Twitter, ARIA label equals LinkedIn, now when that focus shifts to those social media icons, it will announce to your user, button or link Twitter.
Interesting.
Link LinkedIn. Yeah.
So that makes sense. So I've always was under the impression that you're supposed to like use ARIA labels for everything. And so you're talking specifically about using them as almost like a backup to when semantics aren't being followed. Is there any tools that exist? Does Lighthouse actually say this looks as though you should be using semantic markup here rather than whatever kind of, junk you were doing?
So the only thing I've ever seen that Lighthouse or even Axe will spit out to you is if you are using ARIA labels improperly, or you are using markup that isn't semantic that does require an ARIA label, like discernible text is a error that will throw, or a violation that Axe or Lighthouse will throw. And then those two tools will break down and tell you how to fix them, which is really cool because it kind of gives you a little jumping off point.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for the clarification. So I just want to let our viewers that are live now let you know that you can ask questions here on Twitch, and we'll try to get to them with Chris. But I'd like to switch over to sharing his screen now and just try to dive into our actual .NET docs.dev site that we've been putting together, spending lots of time trying to make it look decent and like it's somewhat presentable. So just out of curiosity, what's some of your first impressions on the site? And like when we start diving into the audit, just let us know what you think and we'll just go from there.
And before Chris dives into that, I think we should make it clear to the audience here that we made no attempt to make the site accessible. We actually teed this up fairly nicely for Chris so that he could teach us how to improve upon what we have.
Yeah, the emphasis has been on functionality and appearance so far, and most of the functionality has been written by our own David Pine, and it's really a fantastic site from our side. I just got to give him kudos for that before Chris takes a look at it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I definitely like the site. I really do like how it's laid out. I like the card layout. I've always liked card layouts. I really dig those a lot. So. The one thing I did notice, though, when we did start streaming is that we have the stream actually running right here, so that, the startup card with my name and stuff is not there. But that might affect the results of the audit. But hey, we'll see. We're here having fun, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I am actually in Chrome Canary. I like using Canary. I mostly use Firefox for all of my web work. That being said, there are amazing tools in Firefox for accessibility, but they're not like a Lighthouse or anything like that. But if you are doing anything like with CSS Grid and Flexbox and variable fonts, definitely be using Firefox for that. Accessibility stuff, I would say it's a tie between Chrome and Firefox. But right now we're using Canary because Canary has all like the newer things in it before it hits stable.
So to play on to dig into that just a little bit further, we looked at Edge a minute ago, and we found out that Edge can do Lighthouse reports. Do you know of any reason why you wouldn't want to use Edge for this type of activity?
The only reason I wouldn't use Edge is because there is no Axe extension for Edge that I know of. So I usually use the Axe tool with that in conjunction with Lighthouse in Chrome.
Okay. And there's one thing. Yeah, I was going to say that all the extensions that exist in Chrome are actually now available with Edge because it's Chromium based.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, you can go right to the Google Play Store and download extensions right.
So I think there's a distinction to make here. So it's really two flavors of Edge that we're talking about. There's what I would call legacy Edge, where there probably wasn't an extension, but now there's the Chromium based Edge, where any browser extension for Chrome would work there as well.
That makes sense. Yeah. Well, I mean, we could pop over to Edge. I haven't done much in Edge.
No, we don't want to force your hand. We're just, I guess, making some clarifying statements. LQDev1 on Twitch calls it Credge.
I've also heard Edgium.
Edgium? That's hilarious. I like that. We should make a logo out of that.
Microsoft Hearts Google. That's what it is.
That's funny. All right, so you know what? Let's kick this off. I'm going to inspect this right here. We're going to inspect. I'm just going to scroll down so I don't see the Twitch stream. All right, so in the tabs up here, if you have Axe installed, you'll see Axe right here. So then we can run a tool. So this is using Axe Core under the hood, 3.5.5. The cool thing about Lighthouse as well is that Lighthouse also runs acts under the hood for its accessibility audit. So first things first, let's run an accessibility audit. We can also run performance, like I said, progressive web app, best practices, SEO. We're just going to click desktop for now. And let's do this. We're going to generate the report. It's going to audit .NET docs.dev.
And one thing you'll notice, is because the show has already started, the embed will go away and it will show the next show that's coming up.
Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted, because there were some issues that I saw in this main guest area. So
perfect. That's good.
So from what I can tell, your guys are getting a 95 with accessibility. So that's good. You have some information down here, the runtime settings, URL, when it was fetched, the device, emulated desktop, CPU throttling.
So I'm real quick. I want to go back to that 95 because we breezed over it pretty quickly. Now, me being a lazy developer, I would look at 95 and be like, "Yep, that's great, right? That's like an A in school, right? So do I need that? Like, even if I had a B plus, or if I was in the 80s, I would feel like that's a good thing. So what should the standard be? What should we be trying to achieve? And like, what's realistic?
You always want to try and get to 100. I mean, in my opinion, you want to get to 100, but I think 95 is fine. Like you're in the green, right? And I think you're doing a good job.
Okay.
There's some applications out, well, specifically like Gatsby, for instance. Gatsby's like 100s out of the box, right? There are things you can do to get this up to be 100, and if you did, great. But 95, not even if you're at a 90, I think that's okay. The big things you want to make sure are like what I call like low-hanging fruit, your color contrast, making sure that your ARIA is in place when you need it, and that the application can be read through a screen reader and can be used with a keyboard only.
So our friend LQDev1 makes I guess an interesting comment in the chat. C's get degrees, and so that leads me to wonder, is there a specific score we would get in our accessibility test here where we're putting ourselves at risk for a lawsuit because we've made no attempt whatsoever to address it?
I would say it's hard to go against the Lighthouse score because, like I said, that only gives you 20 to 50% of the errors. You might get 100% all the way around, but your application can't be used with a keyboard at all. Does that make sense? So that could cause a lot of problems. And that's part of hitting, different levels of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. There's 3 of them. There's level A, AA, and AAA. Now, AAA, you'll never hit it. Even accessibility consultants will tell you you'll never hit AAA. You want to strive for AA. And AA is kind of doing all of the right things that you should be doing. Semantic markup, color contrast, discernible texts and names, and using your heading level elements properly.
Interesting.
So another question I have for you, Chris, is when we're going through the accessibility audit, more than likely what's going to happen in the real world is the decision makers in the business are going to say, sorry, we don't have the time or money to address all of these. More than likely they'll ask us to pick off the low-hanging fruit and address that. If you were put in a situation like that, what were some of the things that you would fix? So
I've been in those positions before. And, y'all know me, and a lot of people out there in the community know me. I don't beat around the bush. I go straight to you'll have an opportunity to be sued. And if that's what you want, then that's what you're going to get. When you start bringing up the lawsuit stuff, that's when people get scared, right? And it's your job to kind of instill that fear a little bit. You know what I mean? Because, to me, and I've gotten into arguments with people about this all the time, it's a moral obligation to care about this stuff, right? It is your job to make the web a better place and to make it accessible for everyone. You're going to feel bad at the end of the day if you're doing your part and, nobody cares. So I like to bring up different companies that have been sued, show facts and statistics of different places that have been sued or like, states with like really, really high federal website lawsuits. And then once a company sees that or sees another company within their industry that's been hit, they start, thinking about, oh, wow, we really need to listen to our accessibility team or this developer or that developer.
I think this is another reason why it's important to hire a diverse set of people to work on your applications.
Of course.
Maybe it's in your best interest to hire someone. Seek out a candidate who is red-green colorblind so that you have a true test, someone who can tell you, yeah, here's my experience using your application. Like, here's how awful it really is.
Yeah, well, you all know Jen Luker. Her and I, she was on my podcast, and the title of the podcast was Coding Accessible Careers. And we talked about, because she's also an accessibility specialist, and we talked about, making sure that internal applications are accessible, hiring a diverse team with people with disabilities, because you need those type of people. I worked with people who were colorblind and deaf in one ear and et cetera, and they would flat out say, hey, Chris, I can't see this, or we don't have captions on this video, so it's really hard for me to, hear it because I'm deaf in one ear, et cetera. So building that diverse team is crucial within your organization. And there's a quote from I think she is a UX strategist, and this was about the whole dominoes thing. Accessibility is your ROI. Like, bottom line, that is your ROI. And if a user can't get it from you, they're going to go to somebody else down the street, flat out.
And I think that's a powerful message there that, when you're speaking to the ROI, that will grab the attention of the decision makers in the business. But what I was going to say before we move too much further, there's actually a really good question here in the chat that made me think of something. Our friend LQDev1 is asking, are there web development frameworks that make it easier to build accessible applications? And before you answer that, I'll point out that I know I'm aware of one that I've personally used. So Progress Telerik actually produces some Blazor controls for which would work with our website that we're looking at. They take into account things like ARIA, which we've talked about, that are, again, an afterthought in most companies. So, Chris, what are your thoughts? Are there any web development frameworks you're aware of that you would recommend?
Well, I know Progress is doing great things in the accessibility space. I've talked to Ed Charbonneau, and he's a good buddy of mine, works at Progress. I've talked to some people on the Kendo team, UI team, varying, React and etc. And I know that Progress is doing good stuff with that. There's a couple other frameworks and libraries that are doing okay things. I know Bootstrap has some ARIA stuff built in. If your organization is using Bootstrap, I know that I believe it is Reach by Ryan Florence. I know that he was working on an accessibility compliant clone of React. I think, don't quote me, but definitely look into that tool that Ryan Florence is building, that framework. But other than that, those are the only ones I know of, because a lot of these frameworks and libraries are making accessibility really hard out of the box because they're not accessible out of the box. So that's interesting. Our job to kind of bake that in.
And if we go back to the topic of color blindness, I wanted to dig into that a little further. So I personally don't know much about the topic myself, but I do know that there are different types of color blindness. And so when you're testing, it's not a straightforward test. There's varying degrees of tests that you want to perform.
Yeah, so there's a few different types of color vision deficiency, or CVD for short, or color blindness. You have deuteranopia, protanopia, tritanopia, and then you have monochromatic. And monochromatic is the most rare type of color vision deficiency. It's where you only see in shades of gray. And 1 in 33,000 people are affected with monochromatic color vision deficiency. There is a tool out there, and I use it to test. And let me pull up this other Chrome here, if this works. We already have it open. I thought I had it on this machine. Oh, I do have it on this machine.
I thought Mac OS was better than Windows. Is there no Alt Tab?
Oh, well, I got two, monitors open, so we're just doing the thing. Let's spin this up. So there's a tool called Spectrum, and I think I might have it. If I don't have it, time zone converter. Well, let's install it, shall we? Spectrum.
While you're doing that, Chris, so you were talking about a lot of these frameworks, how they tend to generate like problems right out of the box. Are there any that are worse than, any that you're like, oh man, that project, that's going to be an accessibility nightmare. We need to head that off early.
Not that I can think of. I think they all kind of have their quirks. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
And I have another question too, real quick. So what is there in the way of like CI/CD for something like this? Like, HTML is generated on the fly with our app specifically. So the HTML doesn't get generated until there's a request to the server. So what can we do to kind of proactively sort of evaluating, maybe with like ingesting like a Lighthouse audit in our CI/CD pipeline to make sure that like we're not pushing anything out that could cause problems for everyone that's potentially consuming it?
Yeah, so you can install, I think there is a Lighthouse plugin that you can install in like either Cypress or Jest, but there's also like a Jest X A11Y extension you can install. So when you're running your integration tests or your end-to-end tests, they'll fail like off the rip if you don't have the specific things that you're writing the accessibility test for. So you can always go that route, and then that way nothing ever gets pushed up until the test pass.
Okay.
Chris just used a term that, I actually learned this from him in one of his conference talks. A11Y is a numeronym, correct?
Yep, that's right.
And you'll see this in other areas of the industry. If you've ever seen K8S, Kubernetes, same deal there, sort of an abbreviation. But if you've ever wondered, there you go. There's some knowledge for you.
Yep, A11Y, that's a numeronym, like you said, Scott. And you take the first letter, the last letter, and you count the letters in between. So there's 11 letters between the A and the Y of accessibility, and you put those together. It's like you said, you mentioned K8S for Kubernetes, internationalization, I18N, you've seen that. Localization, L10N for that. So yeah, they're kind of scattered all over the web.
I feel like I'm the last person to realize that that's like the rule for how those are formed. I had no idea.
Yep.
I remember learning that too from you, Chris, at one of your conference talks.
Oh, snap.
I'd be D3D for David.
Yeah.
So let's assume I'm an organization that's on a tight deadline with the project, and I say, we recognize the importance of color blindness, but there's just no time or money for that matter. What would you estimate to be the percentage of the population that we're essentially ignoring by making that decision? Is it 20% or? I
would say, let's see, it's closer to, I think in today's day and age, if you're talking about globally, you're looking at maybe 20 to 25% of all people around the world that have some type of disability. Now that sounds like a small number, right? 20% is not a big number. 25% is not a big number. But if you put that into whole numbers, there are, give or take, a little over 7 billion people around the world. So 1.4 to 1.6% of them have some type of disability. And it doesn't have to be hearing or visual or mobile or cognitive. It could be any type of disability, right? Even anxiety. I have extreme debilitating health anxiety. That is a disability for me. There are certain things I can't do on the web or certain things I can't do in life because it triggers the mental health issues I have. You are excluding that whole entire population, even a population of users that are on slower networks, 2G, 3G, etc. They're all being affected if you are not taking accessibility into consideration.
That's another key point you just made. I feel like almost everybody out there is struggling with something, whether that's a disability or something else. But of those suffering from some sort of disability, not all of those disabilities are visible.
Exactly.
You had just mentioned anxiety. That's something that you could easily hide. No one would ever know.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing when people say, I don't have a disability. I call BS on that. Because everybody sometime, some way in their life is going to have some type of disability or impairment. That's just the way life is. Whether you have a bout of depression for a year and then it goes away, you had a disability.
So let me ask you this then, Chris. As someone who suffers from anxiety, are there design decisions that you would recommend teams make for someone like yourself?
I'm glad you brought that up, Scott. And I talk about this in my talks when I talk about even my performance talk and even my accessibility talks that I give. And we've all seen this. We've all been, victims to it. Things all over the place on a site, not a good use of white space. That can trigger a lot of anxiety because your user is bouncing. They're bouncing all over the place. They don't know where to go, what to do. Things aren't in logical order. Colors, having really bad color contrast can trigger anxiety because the user might not be able to see or they're going to get frustrated. But a big one that I talk about a lot are timers on applications. We've all been there. If you haven't gone to Ticketmaster.com or like Livewire and you had a countdown to purchase your tickets, in a certain amount of time, that always triggered anxiety for me because I'm like, oh, I got to get this ticket. I can't screw up. And then, or hey, I get distracted and I got to walk away and I come back and you ran out of time to get the ticket you wanted. And now you're upset, you're frustrated, right? And your anxiety is triggered.
That's
I
never really thought of that. It's one of those things that just kind of sits on the wayside where it's like, we actually have a timer on our site that counts down to the show before it ticks over. And we actually tried making it even more like alerting users more to it by having it kind of flash on like the last 90 seconds to draw even more attention to it. But I never really thought about the potential harm that might cause to the end user, like especially if they suffer from anxiety.
Yep. And that could be a huge thing because like if you see the countdowns coming, you want to try and get everything done as quickly as you can. So then you're wrecking your brain as quickly as you can as well. And that's not good for you to do. But also I wanted to comment too, Dave, you said that there's a flash. You got to be careful with the flashing because if it's, flashing within a certain amount of time or a specific type of flash, that could trigger somebody with seizures, epilepsy. You got to be careful with animation and movement and stuff like that on the web.
I imagine that being a big problem in certain industries. Say you're building a website for a nightclub and you want to show strobe lights. Well, that's going to trigger someone like what you just described.
Yeah, that's not good.
So does any of the Lighthouse Audit or accessibility tools that exist today, do any of them kind of track that potential thing, like examining CSS and seeing that there's animations and then they are hitting like the opacity or like the, is there stuff that like kind of helps developers at least raise awareness around this?
I'm pretty sure there are a couple extensions out there that do that can identify stuff like that. I think there's a couple applications, testing suites and testing auditing tools that are paid for tools that can do that do like a very, very in-depth audit of all of the things. But you can always Google that. Tenon might make one. Pope Tech might have that built in. But I'm pretty sure I've heard that there are some tools out there, extensions that you can run, or even like standalone applications that will tell you that your animations or flashing within a certain amount of time, that's too much. You can't do that. You need to back it down a little bit. But yeah, they're definitely out there. But it's definitely something you wanna be aware of and be cognizant of.
So can we go back into our audit? I know that we kind of went over some of the little pieces of it, like we got a 95, but I wanted to like kind of double click into some of those little bits, some of them specifically around like, how could we make improvements? How could we actually, now that we have this audit in place, how can we actually take action to be responsible accessibility advocates for updating our website?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Before we do this though, I was trying to get that Spectrum extension to work. What that Spectrum extension does in Chrome is that, and I think there's also one for Firefox and Edge too, Cam, that, you like that, didn't you? You can simulate color blindness in the experience you're viewing. Now it's not going to be one for one, right? I might have deuteranopia and you might have deuteranopia, but it might not be the same visually what we're seeing. Like you might be able to see a color a little bit better than I can see a color, but you can visually see the output of the screen, whether it's you have deuteranopia, protanopia, tritanopia, and if you have monochromatic color vision deficiencies, which is really, really sweet. Oops, no, we don't want to do that. All right, so we're going to dig into this a little bit. First things first, background and foreground colors do not have sufficient color contrast. This is one of those low-hanging fruits, like I was saying. You have a handful of different errors here. And we'll jump into the X. We'll jump into X to get a better breakdown of this. But this just kind of shows you that low contrast text is difficult or impossible for many users to read. So they might have to squint, or they might have to come in, or they might have to, blow the screen up and zoom in a lot.
Right.
Your heading elements are not in sequentially descending order. So this shows like the H3, Thursdays at 11 a.m., which would be up here.
Okay.
And your H5, an accessibility audit, which is down here.
I was just going to say, so like instead of an H3 there, should we be using like a span with a style assigned to it, or what?
Well, it all depends. Like you want to make sure that you're following H1, H2, H3, H4, H5. So you really don't want to skip from like an H2 to an H5 if there's stuff in between that can,
And that goes back to like the semantics.
So I'm hearing that like I know I'm guilty of it. Is a lot of times I'll use like an H, like an H3 because I like the way that it makes the text bigger and bolder, and I should not be doing that. I should be respecting what the H3 is for.
Exactly. Yep. You want to make sure that you're using an H1 through H6 the way they're supposed to be used semantically, and then if you want to put a class on it to style it differently. Sure. Put a class on it to style it different, but never like I don't like styling elements directly. Like if you want all your H1s to H6 to be, one way or another way, it's different if you're doing that for like a base style. You want all your H1s through H6 to be black or green or blue. That's one thing. But changing the H3 to do this, that, and the other thing, and changing the font, that's just going to make it difficult. So definitely throw a class on it.
Gotcha.
And then links do not have discernible names. So right here, this one, SVG. So I'm assuming that this is going to be this up here, and this Twitch one is going to be this right here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
There are no span elements on these. There's no not span elements. I'm sorry, ARIA labels.
Right.
So if you were to navigate to this with a screen reader, it's not going to announce to you what it is.
That's awesome. That's good to know. I'm excited to fix all these things. I'm going to dive in and do that.
He'll have them fixed by lunch.
That's funny. And then you have additional items to manually check. This is where I say that the manual check is where you're going to get a lot of your stuff. Making sure that the page has a logical tab order so you could tab through it and it makes sense.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Interactive controls are keyboard focusable, so like drop downs, radio buttons, combo boxes, stuff like that. Interactive elements indicate their purpose and state. User's focus is directed to when new content is added to the page. User focus is not accidentally trapped into a region, which is what we call a focus trap.
So, Chris, I know you do a conference talk on focus. Are there any tips you would provide there?
Yep. The big one that I can provide the most is do not remove focus. Never set focus to 0. Never set focus to none. Because when you remove focus from that part of the link or the button or whatever the case may be, you're removing it for everybody, both your keyboard users, your mouse users, and potential other assistive technology users, like somebody coming in from a sip and puff machine or something like that. So never, ever, ever remove focus.
Now, for purposes of developers who might not do a lot in UI, can you give us a real quick explanation of what you mean by focus?
Yep. So focus, it's a pseudo element. And what it does is, let's see if we can tab through here. Focus is the ring that you get around elements that you tab to. So that lets your user know that that's where you are within that experience. So let's start up here. So did you see, okay, you see right here, there's a green focus ring around this Twitter handle. That is the focus.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Now right here, the green focus, the ring is blue around this button. So you can go through and that lets your user know where they're at within this experience. Now, if you were to remove that, we can go here. And let's see.
I would assume focus becomes a bigger deal in things like forms.
It does. It's really a big deal in forms, especially login forms, when you have to put in a username and password. So let's say that you have some type of color vision deficiency, a field of vision deficiency, where you can't see the whole screen. You can only see a little bit of it because you have a macular degeneration within your eye. And you can see a little bit of the edge that is the password field. Or even if you don't have the color vision or the eye issues, you put in your username, okay, whatever that may be, and you tab down to put in your password. Muscle memory, your password's probably the same for everything. So you start typing it, but then you get distracted and you look away and you continue typing it because it's muscle memory. But then you look back at your screen and your password isn't there. Where did you type that password?
Ah, interesting.
You don't know.
Right.
And I thought at one point that was a really far-fetched example, really exaggerated. But I actually had somebody come up to me after I gave that talk and talked about that and said that it actually happened to them, that they went to go type their password. There was no focus, so they could see where they were typing it. They typed it. They didn't know where they typed it to, and they got into a lot of issues because they had like a security breach.
So I'm feeling like a lot of these issues around like focus and tab order and stuff could be rooted out by like navigating your site without the mouse, doing it all by keyboard.
Yeah, you want to make sure that's when it comes back to the manual checks. You want to remove the mouse entirely and just use the keyboard.
I think there's a bunch of sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, I think there's actually a day that's dedicated to that, isn't there? Like in the community for like allyship, where they'll just like spend the day not using their mouse, and it kind of helps ensure like it allows you to be more empathetic to consumers that are in that type of situation. And it also helps you improve as a developer, right? Writing for that.
Speaking of empathy, LQDev1 made a point sort of related to that. You know, I think we often take for granted that here in the US we have fantastic internet connections, right? Even if we're using our smartphone, you know, we've got a 5G network we're working with. That's not the case everywhere in the world. And so some companies actually scale down that internet connection and throttle the bandwidth to get an idea of what others in the world truly experience when they interact with their application. Yeah,
and that happens too. And you know, network connection and performance is part of accessibility. It's all under that UX umbrella. You know what I mean? Same thing with language.
So we actually have a form that you could go to if you wanted to see what a form would look like in terms of accessibility. So if you go to like the schedule tab at the top there, that nav, and then scroll down a little bit, there's a couple shows. Just click on one of those to submit a topic.
And that goes for any of you in the viewing audience as well.
Yeah, this is a recent thing where we've opened up our future schedule. So anyone who's watching, if you'd like to be on the show, we encourage you to, go submit an idea. We have our schedule out there, and we're skipping on holidays, but we have plenty of opportunities for people to share some stuff as long as it relates to .NET and piques others' interests and adds value. We're excited to have it.
Nice. Yeah, right here. So running the audit, you get an 88. It's not too bad, but can be improved. But one of the things here that you're going to need is a label with this form control, which I'm assuming is this down here.
Yeah. See, I was trying to get clever and like search Twitter. So like if you put your first name and your last name in, no. Your first, like in the first name and last name fields.
Oh, sorry. So
then you have that. So like here's Chris, and then there's DeMars, and then if you do search Twitter, it'll actually open up Twitter with a search for Chris DeMars to see it, help you find a handle, right?
Oh, that's fancy.
Trying to be fancy. So that button basically doesn't have. So this is a good thing to look at. So I guess it's just one of those things that I never really thought of.
Yeah.
So in other words, we are missing out on 20 to 25% of the population, hypothetically, given the current state of that form.
Correct.
And that's something we're going to fix. We're excited to fix.
Yeah, that's good. So here we're running Axe. Like I said, Axe is by DQ. You can use this tool to do all your audits and stuff. It gives you all issues, violations, needs review, rejected best practices. The one you want to care about the most is the violations, which is 14. This is a new feature where you can save the results. So you can go back and you can see how things have gone. You can run it again. But as far as the homepage goes, you have 14 violations. So 12 of those are color contrast issues. 2 of those are the discernible text, which is up here.
Okay.
So you said the tool for color contrast issues was Spectrum? Was that
Spectrum?
Because did you ever determine if you have that running in one of these browsers? Because I'm interested in hearing more about that. Because as I look at it, I'm like, I see black on gray, but is that what it's talking about there?
It could be, yeah. There's a handful of different ones. Let me see if I can.
Well, and I was going to say too, like taking action on an audit like this, how is it that I would go through and like actually update these styles? Like, how can we like click into where those issues are and see, does it like suggest or kind of show like, hey, here's where you could pick a better color value, and where like the, thresholds are?
Yep. So I will get into that. Let me open this up real quick. So we have spectrum. Cool. So now we're going to see what it looks like with users with protanopia. Okay, so let's do, come on now. There we go. So this is how the site looks with your users with protanopia.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Wow.
Interesting how the purple changes to a shade of blue.
Yep.
Yeah, that's wow.
This is deuteranopia. So it's a little bit different, but a little bit darker in some spots.
And which one of those disabilities would you say is the most common?
Deuteranopia. Deuteranopia is the most common type of color vision deficiency. This is tritanopia. This is a rare version.
Interesting.
So this all seems pretty legible to me, and I'm still trying to figure out why it's warning us about contrast. Because like I'm looking for actionable activities we can do here.
So right here, I just in the normal view, I could barely make out what this was.
Yeah, it's hard to see that one.
It's very hard to see. And this is, especially now if you have monochromatic, right?
Oh, wow.
This is the most rare version.
And that's where you don't see any of the color spectrum?
Right, you just see in shades of gray.
Wow. It really makes you like think about how you're presenting content.
And this is just like a low contrast view here. So let's go back to normal, and then let's get out of here. Let's go back to this. So yeah, so X is great, and I know we only have a little bit of time left, but you can inspect the node, so it'll open up the dev tools for you and show you where what the problem is. You can go through each one of the errors, and it'll tell you down here the description, the impact, how impactful it is to your user. If you wanted to learn more, it opens up DQ University and tells you about the impact, the rule set, the rule ID, the web content accessibility guidelines, success criterion. I believe that's where it's at within the guidelines, why it matters, all this amazing, amazing information. Low vision, color blindness, those are the disabilities that are affected. And it'll tell you how to solve the problem down here, which is really, really great. So if we go back to the first one, let's say, and let's highlight it. So here you can see there's a dotted box around this, and this is telling you this is where the error is.
Yep.
So we can inspect the node. Okay, well, it's this anchor tag and this hover, right?
Yep.
Now, I noticed there's a tool in Google's Chrome's DevTools where there's no contrast information available. And I've noticed that if you style this on an element, if you style the color on an element, it doesn't work. It works with classes. But if we were to bring this down some, a little darker, maybe. Okay, so we have this right here.
Sure.
We can rerun it. And if all worked out well, we'll see. This violation should go from a 14 to a 13. There we go. So we just fixed one violation by just changing that color just a little bit.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Right? And if you do this for everything, just tweak it just a little bit, you'll be good to go.
Okay, that was like a bring down the house moment. This is like if we were in a conference, this would be the part where people applaud.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, yes.
Well, another really awesome tool within Chrome's DevTools is this right here as well. Now, I was saying that there's a tool in the DevTools in the color swatch that you can use for color contrast, right? Well, Chrome just released this. This is really sweet. If you look in this box right here, I'm pointing at the screen like y'all can see this.
Can you zoom in just a little bit on that one? Because that pop-up is a little bit small, and I want to make sure that we capture that good. Okay.
No, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Sweet.
There you go.
All right, we're going to inspect this. And then we're going to go here. Oh, that pop-ups.
Okay.
Yeah. So it tells you that it's a small element with a text muted class. The color, it shows the color, the font, and the font styles. But it also has an accessibility section where it says the contrast is 4.69 and it passes. That's because it's above that ratio, that threshold.
Okay.
But it's not keyboard focusable. Okay, at least it's passing, right?
Yeah.
We have an important tag on here. That's no bueno. We'll talk about that later, Dave.
Well, that's actually coming from Bootstrap, and so that's where I think a lot of
then
developers...
we'll really have to have a conversation.
Chris, let me ask you this: if we were coming at this from the opposite direction, say the website doesn't exist yet, and we want to select a set of colors that really plays well with a test like this, there's good contrast. Yep. Is there any kind of a tool we could use to help select colors that work well with each other?
And I will show you right now. Let me pull it over. If it loads, it should load. Yep. This was a tool that Leah Veru created, contrast ratio. So take your colors and put them in here, and it'll tell you it passes. You can also swap the colors, and it'll tell you whether it passes or not. This is a great tool to use right here. So that way you can take all of the color combinations based on the background color, throw them in here, swap them, and see if they pass or not. So contrast-ratio.com is a great tool by Leah Veru.
I think that's exactly what I was looking for. So often as developers, we just lack those design skills. So we lean on frameworks like Bootstrap, and we just assume that they've taken care of the problems for us.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be really cool. I know that so many developers out there use it. And if out of the box, there's certain things that are less than ideal in terms of accessibility, it'd be great if someone would spend the time to build out a theme that is accessible, like friendly, like accessibility first for Bootstrap, so that you could take these elements. Because a lot of times as developers, you just kind of copy in sections of, markup, and it has the style classes in there already. And you just assume, oh, it looks good to me, ship it, right?
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous thing to get into.
It is definitely. Before we end, I think we got like 3 minutes left. I wanted to show this real quick. I did write an article about this. It's really, really cool if you're checking out colors for different things on your experience. If you highlight it and you inspect it and you go to the color on that class, you can click on this swatch, and it'll have this little accessibility thing right here. It tells you the contrast ratio. It's 4.69 and it passes. Well, if you hit this little drop down, now you get these two bars that go across the palette. The top one is AA, the bottom one is AAA. So if you're trying to figure out how to get these to pass, right now it passes AA and it fails AAA, you can drag the color all around and you can see if it passes or not.
That's so awesome.
So if it's not passing, if you just go a little bit of a shade under, now it passes AA. You want to go AAA, drag it a little bit more, and boom. Now you pass AAA. You got 2 checks here.
Oh, that's like applause worthy, man. That's so cool. I love that.
It's an amazing, amazing tool. And yeah, it's a little bit darker than the gray you had, but at least now you know that it's a dark enough gray where it passes AA and AAA. And this is an amazing, amazing tool built into the DevTools in Chrome.
Where's your blog post on that? We'll make sure we add that in the notes here for the show.
I'd have to check it out. Let me see.
Send it.
We'll put it.
I'll send it. I'll send it over.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, hey, we're
really
running short on time here, Chris. We'd love to dig into this deeper, but we've got just a couple of minutes. Are there any closing thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, like I said before, accessibility. It's not a requirement. It's a must. You got to care. Always think about the user first. We build stuff all the time that we think is really cool. That's how I started back in way back in the day. I built things that were completely inaccessible. Think about everyone else besides yourself, because the world is bigger than you. Accessibility is a must, and just do the right thing.
Awesome, dude. This has been an amazing episode, and
Thanks for
I would have
having me.
expected nothing less. It's great to have you on. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Let's do it.
And thanks, man. Thanks.
Let's do it.
Who do we have next week? We were looking at the thing all day. It was Jeremy Sinclair, wasn't it?
Yep, Jeremy Sinclair. Yep, great conversation we're going to have about .NET. So I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Well, everybody, come back and see us next week on the .NET Doc Show.
Whoop, whoop. Peace.